The judge called me a monster. He said I stole the last penny from the mouths of orphaned children. I was sentenced to 30 years, and in that instant the truth no longer mattered. Justice was blind, but it was also deaf. My name is Martha. For 15 years, I wasn't just the head cook at the Saint Jude Orphanage. I was the only mother those children knew. When the bank threatened to take the building, I saw the panic in their eyes. That safe. Pause. That safe wasn't stolen. It was survival. I hid it so they could have a future. Now the only sound I hear isn't laughter. It's the hum of the cold cell light. The silence here is heavy. It smells of bleach and regret. I always wonder who hears those whispers from behind the walls. I'm speaking to you from a cell, from a place where hope is almost forbidden. Where are you listening to my story from? Are you in your kitchen, preparing dinner, driving your car, going home? I pray that you are free. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I want to know how far my voice can still reach. Because for 20 years, I clung to a single memory, a single faith. The face of a frightened girl who saw me being dragged away by the police. I didn't know it then, but that girl would one day be the key to my redemption. I clung to that image of Anna, her dark, quiet eyes holding the wooden bird I had carved, as the guards dragged me out of the courtroom. The sound of the judge's gavel still echoed in my ears, but it was a hollow sound. 30 years. The word monster hung in the air like stale smoke, clinging to my hair and clothes. I didn't cry. I was numb. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and the cheap cologne of my public defender, who patted me on the shoulder and said, "I'm sorry, Martha. We did what we could." He didn't. Nobody did. The truth was too complicated a meal for them to serve, so they served me instead. The sacrifice I made, the act of faith to protect those children. In the eyes of the law, it was just greed. They didn't take me back to the holding cell. They led me down a different corridor, one that smelled of damp concrete and ancient despair. The air changed. It became heavier, colder. The sound of my shoes on the floor was the only sound I recognized as my own, but even it seemed frightened. I was handed over to 2 new guards, men who wouldn't look me in the eye. To them, I wasn't Martha, the cook. I was Cargo, the orphanage thief, one of them muttered to the other, with a disdain that cut deeper than the verdict. The world outside was disappearing, and I was becoming the story they told about me, a monster who stole from children. The irony was so sickening it almost made me choke. I hid that money. To the children, so that the bank wouldn't take the only home they had. But how do you explain that to a system that only sees black and white, when your action was gray? The transport was a windowless metal van. I was handcuffed to a seat, the icy steel biting into my wrists. It was the same cold as the kitchen counter in Saint Jude before dawn, but this one didn't promise warm bread. It promised confinement. The van smelled of sweat, urine, and old fear. There was another woman there, huddled in the opposite corner. Her eyes were empty, a kind of emptiness that only comes after everything has been taken away. I tried to say something. There's been a mistake, but my voice wouldn't come out. Shame silenced me. Shame not for what I did, but for what they did. They said what I did. The van's engine started, a low roar, and we were thrown into darkness as it sped away. Every bump in the road was a physical reminder of my fall. I didn't know where I was going, only that I was going away from the light. Through a small metal grate at the back, I could see fragments of the city passing by, blurred car lights, the warm glow of house windows. People living their lives, people eating dinner, laughing free. Tears finally came, warm and silent. I wasn't crying over 30 years. I was crying for the children. What would happen to Anna? To Timmy, who would only eat if I cut his food into star shapes? To Sarah, who needed her medication? I had been the only constant in their chaotic lives. I sacrificed myself to give them a building, but what they really needed was me, and that was my real miscalculation. The van stopped. The silence that followed was more deafening than the engine's roar. Then I listened, the sound of a heavy metal gate opening. It wasn't a click. It was a long, drawn-out groan, the sound of steel giving up. The van doors swung open and the cold light of spotlights blinded me, a relentless white light devoid of warmth. The prison. It was enormous, a beast of concrete and barbed wire against the night sky. "Welcome home, darling," the guard sneered, shoving me out. As my feet touched the yard, I knew two things. I was no longer Martha, and my faith was about to be tested in a way I could never have imagined. I had lost my freedom, but it was only there, under that cold light, that I realized I was also about to lose myself. The admission wasn't a reception. It was a demolition. We were shoved into a large room, its white tiles halfway up the wall, the rest painted a sickly green. The air was icy and carried a strong chemical smell, a mixture of industrial disinfectant and something metallic, like rust. It was the smell of hopelessness being scrubbed into the floor. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling hummed, emitting a relentless white glow that made everyone look like corpses. There was no warmth there. There was no life. It was a space designed to process meat, not people. We were ordered to stand in line against the cold wall. The icy tile penetrated my thin courtroom blouse. Beside me, the empty woman from the van trembled, a small rhythmic tremor she tried to hide. No one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the lights and the sharp click of keys on a guard's belt, a sound I learned to identify as the rhythm of our confinement. A guard sitting behind a metal desk looked bored. She didn't look up. "Name!" she barked, and I answered. She tapped the keys. "Empty your pockets." I had nothing. She looked at me for the first time, her eyes sweeping over me as if I were a stain on the wall. "To the search room. Take everything out." The command was so casual, but the impact was like a slap. All we were led in groups of 3 to a smaller room, divided by dirty plastic curtains. Another guard, a corpulent woman with a face that seemed carved from stone, stood with her arms crossed. Clothes on the floor. All of them. Humiliation was the goal. It was a calculated breakdown. I undressed, my movements stiff and clumsy, trying to maintain a shred of dignity while I felt my bones shrink from the cold. Nudity under that cold light was a form of violence. It ripped away the last layer of who I was. "Open your mouth. Raise your arms. Turn around. Crouch." Her voice was monotonous, devoid of any emotion. I obeyed. I became an object to be inspected. When I crouched, I felt the hot tears of shame burning my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. The cold air touched my bare skin, and I had never felt so exposed, so erased. After the inspection, they threw a rough towel over me. "Shower, 5 minutes." The water was lukewarm, but it smelled of sulfur. I used the yellow soap, which felt like sandpaper, and scrubbed my skin until it was red, trying to wash away the smell of the courtroom, the smell of fear, the smell of my old life. But the smell of prison was already seeping in. When I got out, they threw a uniform on the floor near my feet. A faded orange jumpsuit, rough and reeking of bleach and someone else's sweat. There was no bra, just thin panties and the jumpsuit. Wearing that was the true baptism. They took me to another station. "Photo!" A bright light shone in my face. I blinked. "Look at the camera," said the photographer, bored. I looked, but I don't know what he saw. I no longer felt like I was there. Then, fingerprints. Cold black ink, staining my fingers, the same fingers that used to check the seasoning of the soup, that held the small hands of children. Finally, back to the first guard. She slid a plastic bracelet onto my wrist. On it was a number. "This is you now," she said emotionlessly. 77401 Martha. They put my name at the end, as an afterthought, a nickname they might not even use. I was no longer Martha, the cook from Saint Jude. I was 77401. As I was led down another corridor, now wearing the plastic boots they'd given me, the weight of the uniform seemed to pull me to the ground. The fabric was stiff. Each step was a reminder of what I had become. They gave me a thin roll of bedding and a bar of soap. I looked at the other women being processed behind me, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and the same emptiness I'd seen in the van. They too were becoming numbers. That's when I grasped the deeper truth, a mini turn in my understanding. Prison wasn't about the concrete walls or the steel doors. It was a process. It was a factory designed to dismantle you piece by piece until you forgot the form you once had. The real sentence wasn't 30 years. It was erasure. And I was only on day one. They led me through a labyrinth of corridors. The hum of the admission lights was replaced by a different, deeper hum, and the distant echo of female voices, a sharp, bitter sound, rising and falling like the wind. Steel bar gates slid open and closed electronically in front of and behind us, each snapping shut with a clang. The pneumatic tire made my chest vibrate. The guard escorting me didn't speak. His only language was the jingle of the keys on his belt. We stopped before a massive steel door, painted a peeling beige with a small barred window at eye level. The smell in this corridor was different. A sour mixture of overcooked food, mold, and something I can only describe as stagnant sadness. The guard banged his baton on the door. "Your roommate has arrived." He laughed, a short, dry sound. He unlocked the door, a sound of metal being forced open, creaking, and pushed it open. Inside, 77401. The cell was a concrete box. It was perhaps 6 steps long by 4 wide. A metal bunk was bolted to the right wall, and on the back wall, a single stainless steel unit served as both sink and toilet. There was no seat. Light came from a dim, grimy ceiling light, protected by a metal cage. But what struck me first was the occupant. In the bottom bunk, a figure lay facing the wall. She didn't move. The air was still and heavy, as if the breath of 1,000 nights before was still trapped there. "The top one is yours," the guard said. I went in. He didn't wait. The door was pulled open, and then I heard it, the sound that would define my life. It wasn't a click. It was a bang, a final, heavy sound of steel hitting steel, followed by the turning of a lock. A sound that didn't say goodnight. It said, "It's over." The echo of that bang seemed to last a whole minute, and when it faded, it left behind a deafening silence. For a long time, I stood still, my fingers still gripping the thin roll of bed linen. I could feel the eyes of the figure in the bottom bunk on my back, even though it wasn't moving. Finally, with trembling hands, I threw my sheet onto the top bunk. The mattress was a thin sheet of blue plastic, cold to the touch and with a faint smell of cleaning chemicals. I crawled up, the icy metal creaking under my weight. I sat up. The ceiling was inches from my face, covered in graffiti I couldn't read, and water stains. The silence continued, broken only by my own breathing, which sounded loud and frightened. Finally, my voice came out, a harsh whisper. "My name is Martha." The figure below me remained motionless for so long that I thought it was asleep. Then, a low, rough voice cut through the air. "I don't care." A pause. "Don't talk to me. Don't look at me. Don't pray aloud. And don't cry. If you cry, I'll give you a reason to cry." Fear was a chill in my veins. I didn't answer. I curled up on my side, pulling at the thin, rough blanket that smelled of dust and starch. It was useless against the cold emanating from the concrete. And then, at exactly 10 o'clock, the lights in the cell and the corridor went out. Click. The darkness was instant and absolute. It wasn't the soft darkness of a room at night. It was the darkness of a tomb. My eyes strained, trying to find any form, but there was nothing. The only visual comfort was gone. And that's when the echo of silence began. Without light, my other senses sharpened painfully. I could hear the slow dripping of a tap somewhere, the sound of the metal bed creaking as my cellmate turned over, the distant sound of boots in a corridor, and then the sounds of the prison night. A woman, 3 or 4 cells away, began to sob, a low, desperate cry that rose to a moan. From elsewhere, a voice shouted, "Shut up!" I squeezed my eyes shut. I tried to conjure up Anna's face. I tried to remember the smell of cinnamon and apples baking in the Saint Jude kitchen. But the darkness was too thick. The smell of mold and cold steel dominated everything. Suddenly, a sharp scream pierced the night, a sound of pure terror, followed by the sound of running and guards shouting, "Lock down!" My cellmate sighed, a sound of irritation, not fear. She was used to it. I was frozen. It was my mini turning point, my terrifying epiphany. I hadn't been sent to prison to be punished. I had been sent here to be forgotten. The outside world no longer existed. The court, the judge, my sacrifice, all irrelevant. The only reality was this concrete box, this darkness, and the sounds of women breaking down around me. The first night wasn't about sleep. It was about surviving the echo of what I had lost. The darkness didn't last. At precisely 5 a.m., it was as if God flipped a switch. The lights in the cell and hallway exploded in a cold, white glow, buzzing instantly. My eyes ached. There was no gentle alarm, no sun slowly rising, just artificial light, and a second later the sound. One clang, 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 the deafening sound of metal clashing against metal. A guard walking down the corridor, banging a baton on each steel door. "Stand up! Count!" My cellmate, the figure I'd barely seen, grunted. She didn't stretch. She exploded out of bed, a fluid, practiced movement of pure survival. She was on the floor and putting on her shoes in less than 3 seconds. At the door. "Now," she growled, not even looking at me. I awkwardly climbed down from the bunk, my bare feet hitting the cold concrete floor. The smell in the cell in the morning was sour. The smell of 2 people breathing stale air, the metallic smell of the steel toilet. We stood side by side as the guard passed by. His eyes took us in, but didn't register us. They saw he just marked something on a clipboard and moved on. "2!" he yelled to the next guard. We were cattle. A second later, an electric hum and the deafening sound of the central locking system being released. The door to our cell unlocked with a thunk heavy. "Sink 5 minutes," my cellmate barked. She shoved me out of the cell and we went into the pod, the common area of our block. It was chaos. Women in faded orange uniforms were everywhere, screaming, rushing to the line for the communal showers or fighting for space at the metal sinks. The air was thick with the smell of cheap soap and morning breath. My cellmate, whom I later learned they called Rhino, used her size to push her way through. I hid behind her, feeling dozens of eyes on me. Dead eyes, angry eyes, curious eyes. Looking here was a weapon. I kept my eyes on the floor. After the cleaning, we went to the cafeteria. The word cafeteria is too kind. It was a hangar, a concrete barn with long metal tables bolted to the floor. The noise was a solid wall of sound. The dragging of boots, the clatter of plastic trays, hundreds of female voices shouting and laughing, a deafening echo ricocheting off the bare walls. It was the sound of anger and anxiety trying to break free. We were pushed through a line. The food was a gray paste that could have been oatmeal, served with a metal ladle on an orange tray. A piece of stale bread. A plastic mug with a brown liquid that vaguely smelled of burnt coffee. My stomach, which had once served banquets at Saint Jude, churned. But the hunger from the previous night was a sharp pain. I picked up my tray. And then I froze. Where to sit? The cafeteria wasn't a place to eat. It was a social map of power. Rhino went to a table in the center, where a group of equally intimidating women greeted her with nods. There were tables that were clearly for specific groups, families of the prison. I saw an empty table near the corner and started walking towards it. "Don't even think about it, newbie." The voice was low and dangerous. A woman with eyes that looked like shards of ice blocked my path. "That table is for property. You're not property." "Property?" I recoiled, my tray trembling. The smell of fear was real, and I realized it was themey. I finally found a spot at the end of a table near the trash cans, where a few other quiet, frightened women pecked at their food. No one spoke. I ate the gray paste. It tasted of cardboard and despair. It tasted of punishment. I forced myself to swallow, watching from under my eyelashes. I saw the hierarchies. I saw who shared food and who stole food. I saw the guards on the platforms above, watching everything with a boredom that was more terrifying than anger. As we were being led back, I saw the sun for the first time. It was a thin sliver of daylight coming from a tall barred window at the end of the corridor. The light cut through the floating dust, but it didn't bring warmth. Inside, surrounded by hundreds of women in orange jumpsuits, the sunlight itself seemed to have been tinted. The sun wasn't yellow, it was orange. It was my mini turning point. The shock of the first night had passed. The brutality of admission had passed. What remained was this: the clang 5 a.m., the countdown, the gray folder, the struggle for a spot on the sink, the sea of orange. The realization hit me with the force of a punch. My punishment wasn't an event, it was a cycle. This was my life. This would be my life tomorrow, and next week, and next year, for 30 years. The alarm clock from hell didn't ring just once. It would ring 10,000 times. The real sentence was routine. After the first week, the fog of shock began to dissipate, but it was replaced by a haze of boredom and fear. The routine was a grinder. Wake up, count, gray folder, walk in lines, be locked up, be unlocked. I was a ghost in my own body, focused only on following Rhino's rules. Don't look, don't talk, don't cry. On the 8th day, my number was called after breakfast. 77401, work block, laundry. Rhino, who was being led to the machine shop, gave me a single look. The laundry. Shit. Keep your mouth shut and count the sheets. Don't let Spoon catch you stealing. Spoon? The name hung in the air as I was led by a different guard to a part of the prison basement I hadn't seen. The further down we went, the hotter the air became. And the smell hit me like a wall. It wasn't the sour smell of the cell block. It was bleach. Caustic bleach. So strong it burned your nose, mixed with the hot, humid vapor of industrial soap. The laundry room wasn't a room. It was a dragon's mouth. A vast concrete basement filled with steam, so dense it obscured the back wall. The noise was deafening. The industrial roar of giant dryers, the shrill hiss of steam presses, and above all, women screaming to be heard above the chaos. The heat was oppressive, clinging to my skin and uniform in seconds. The air was heavy and difficult to breathe. Dozens of women, their faces red and glistening with sweat, moved with frantic speed, pushing giant metal carts full of gray sheets and orange uniforms. They worked with a silent fury. A tall woman with a long scar on her neck and her hair pulled back in a tight bun stood on a raised platform, watching. She wasn't working. She was supervising. She pointed at me. Rookie, to the presses. That must have been Spoon. My job was on the sheet press. It was a monstrous machine, a giant padded metal jaw that hissed constant steam. My job was to take the heavy, damp sheets from the carts, smooth them on the bottom plate, and press 2 buttons, one for each hand so you wouldn't trap your own arms, to make the top jaw come down and press them. Chee, clack, chee, clack. The pace was relentless. Beside me, another woman, older, with short gray hair, worked with a mechanical grace, her movements so practiced she seemed part of the machine. I was clumsy. The sheets were heavy and hot. The steam burned my face. In 20 minutes, my orange uniform was soaked with sweat, clinging to my back. My hands, accustomed to handling knives and spoons with delicacy, were turning red and raw. I was moving far too slowly. The sheet cart beside me was overflowing, while the older woman's cart steadily slowed. I tried to go faster. I pulled at a sheet that was tangled, and for a split second, my left hand slipped too close to the press. The hot steam bit me. I screamed, a short, muffled sound, and pulled my hand away. A bright red streak bloomed on my palm. The pain was sharp, white, and then silence. The machine beside me stopped. The older woman had stopped working. The noise of the laundry subsided as eyes turned to me. Spoon was descending from the platform, her steps slow and deliberate. Problem 77401. Her voice was low, but it cut through the noise. She looked at my hand, which I was trying to hide. You stop? The press stops. The press stops. The count slows. The count slows. The guard punishes us. Do we understand? I nodded, tears of pain and humiliation stinging my eyes. I don't want to hear your head nod. I want to hear your yes. Yes, I whispered. Yes, who? She hissed. The older woman beside me spoke, her voice surprisingly calm. Yes, Chief Spoon. She understood. Spoon turned to the older woman. Stay out of this, Grace. Grace just stared at Spoon, fearless. A stalemate. Spoon finally scoffed. Get back to work. As Spoon walked away, I turned to the machine, my hand throbbing. I was blinking rapidly, trying to force the tears back, remembering Rhino's rule. Don't cry. Then I felt something pressed against my burned hand. Grace, the older woman, had her back to me, working at her own machine, but she had reached behind her and placed a cold, wet cloth on my palm. A cloth soaked with cold water from her own bottle. She didn't look at me. She didn't say anything. She just continued her pace. Chee. Clacky held the cold cloth against the burn, the pain diminishing to a bearable throb. It was the first mini-turn, the first paradox of my new life. I had been threatened and saved in the same minute. I realized that prison wasn't just about hierarchies of power and brutality. It was about these moments. Secret acts of kindness that were more dangerous than acts of violence. Grace had taken a risk for me, and I didn't even know her name. I went back to work, the cold cloth hidden in my hand, the sound of the press marking a new rhythm. Not of punishment, but of survival. Twice a week, if time allowed and we weren't in lockdown. We had an hour in the yard. The yard was a patch of dead grass and cracked concrete the size of a school football field, surrounded by two 30-foot-high barbed wire fences, topped with rolls of razor wire that gleamed cruelly in the sun. Guard towers dotted the perimeter. The first time I stepped outside, the fresh air was a shock. After days breathing laundry steam and the stagnant air of the cell block, the wind on my face felt like a blessing. But the feeling was short-lived. The sky was up there, vast and blue, but it looked like a distant painting, something that didn't belong to me. It was a false freedom, a long leash. The yard was just a larger cell, and it was the most dangerous place in the prison. In the cell block, the rules were about silence and personal space. In the mess hall, they were about speed and avoidance. In the laundry room, it was about work and Spoon's authority. But the yard was where the prison families lived. The space was a visible map of power. As soon as I stepped onto the concrete, I saw it. Groups formed instantly. Spoon and her laundry girls took over the metal picnic tables near the gate. They controlled access, who came in and out. On the other side, near the makeshift basketball court, was a group of younger, noisier women. And in the concrete bleachers near the back wall was Rhino, my cellmate, sitting like a queen on her throne, surrounded by her own entourage. They were quiet, observant, and seemed older. Between these groups, there were neutral zones, like islands, where women like me, the civilians, the unaffiliated, wandered nervously, never stopping for long. I saw Grace, the laundry woman who gave me the cold cloth. She was sitting alone on an isolated patch of concrete near the fence, reading a paperback with its cover torn off. She seemed like an island of calm in that sea of tension. I wanted to thank her. Her act at the laundry was the only spark of humanity I had seen, and I clung to it. I started walking toward her, keeping my head down, trying to appear casual. I was about 6 feet away when a shadow fell over me. Going somewhere. 77401? Spoon's voice was silk and poison. She and 2 other laundry women had risen from the picnic tables. The patio, which had seemed so vast, suddenly felt small. I was just going to sit down, I murmured, my eyes on the ground. No, Spoon said, taking a step closer. The smell of bleach seemed to follow her. You're not going to sit down. Leaf Grace likes to be alone, and we don't like you bothering people. I froze. This wasn't about Grace. It was about me. It was a continuation of the warning in the laundry room. She was marking me. I didn't mean to cause trouble, I said, my voice as thin as air. Too late, said one of the women beside her, stepping forward. You think you're special? Did you burn your little hand? Fear was a cold knot in my stomach. I knew this was a test. If I backed down, I'd be a target forever. If I spoke, I'd be beaten. I was trapped. And then, another voice cut through the air, low and heavy as thunder. She's from my block. Rhino. She hadn't gotten up from the bleachers. She wasn't even looking at us. She was cleaning her nails with a toothpick, but her voice carried across the courtyard as if she were using a microphone. Silence fell. Spoon stiffened. She turned slowly to face Rhino across the courtyard. She's in my laundry shift, Rhino. That makes her my problem. Rhino finally raised her head. Her eyes met Spoon's. She didn't yell. She spoke calmly. She sleeps 3 feet away from me. That makes her my problem. No one moved. The entire courtyard was watching. It wasn't a fight over me. It was a territorial dispute over a piece of property. And I was the property. Spoon glared at me with a hatred that made me recoil. She gave a short, bitter laugh. Fine, keep your dog on a leash. She turned and went back to her tables. The courtyard exhaled. Conversations resumed. The basketball started bouncing. The moment had passed. I stood there, trembling, stuck in the middle of nowhere. Grace was still reading, or pretending to read. Rhino went back to cleaning her nails. I hadn't been saved. I had been claimed. That was the mini turning point. I realized that Grace's kindness had made me a target, and Rhino's protection had made me a possession. I had no allies. I only had different owners. That vast courtyard was the most claustrophobic chessboard I had ever been on. If routine was the grinder, the mail was the only cog turning in the opposite direction. The mail happened every day at 4 in the afternoon, right after the afternoon shift's count. It was the most important ritual of the day, more vital than the food. It was the only moment the outside world seeped in, and the air in the cell block became electric with an almost childlike anxiety. A guard came with a metal cart and shouted the numbers, not the names. 7752 Satu, 81344. Women rushed, grabbed their thin envelopes, and retreated to their beds like animals guarding a meal. Some sniffed the paper, others held it up to the light. I saw women break down in tears at the sight of a son's handwriting, and I saw women whose faces became masks of fury when the check they expected didn't arrive. And then there were those, like Rhino, who never received anything. They were the ones who watched the most, their eyes filled with a contempt that was nothing but rotten envy. In my 3rd week, I had earned the right to the commissary, the prison store. With the little money I earned in the laundry, I didn't buy chocolate or coffee. I bought paper, thin, almost transparent stationery, stamped envelopes, and a flex pen, a short, flexible rubber pen, impossible to turn into a weapon. These were the most precious objects I possessed. That night, after the lights went out, I waited for the sound of Rhino's breathing to deepen. Then, under the rough blanket, with the small reading flashlight I had bought, I wrote. My hand, now covered in calluses and small burn scars from the laundry, felt strange holding a pen. Chef Martha's handwriting, which used to write the weekly menus with elegant flourishes, was shaky and clumsy. The handwriting of 7 to Sesam 401. I wrote 2 letters. The first was to the new director of the Saint Jude Orphanage, the man who took over after the old one ran off with the pension funds, the man whose testimony buried me. I had to be careful. I knew every word would be read by a censor. I couldn't say, I hid the money. It was in the pantry vent. I couldn't ask, did you find it? Is the building safe? Instead, I wrote, I am praying for the well-being of Saint Jude. I pray that the financial problems have been resolved and that the children are safe. Please tell them. Tell them I am thinking of them. The second letter was more difficult. It was to Anna. I addressed it to the orphanage's care, praying that she was still there. Dear Anna, I am far away, but I am thinking of you. Remember what I said about the wooden bird. It may not have real wings, but it can fly as high as your imagination. Keep reading. Stay strong. Don't let them tell you who you are. Sealing those envelopes was like putting a piece of my soul in a bottle and throwing it into the ocean. The next morning, I delivered them to the block's mailbox. And then, the real torture began. The waiting. Every day, at 4 p.m, my stomach turned into a cold stone. The guard shouted out numbers. Mine was never called. The days turned into a week. I worked in the laundry, the chee-clack. The steam press ticked away the seconds of my wait. I ate the gray pasta. I avoided Spoon in the yard. But it was all a blur. My real life unfolded in that minute of anticipation at 4 p.m. Grace, the quiet woman from the laundry, saw me watching the door. "The first letter is the hardest," she whispered one day as we folded uniforms. "It's like waiting for an echo you're not sure you made." She was right. I didn't need an answer. I needed to know my voice still existed out there. 2 weeks passed. Then, on the 15th day, the guard shouted my number. 77401. My heart stopped. I ran. It wasn't a letter. Tome. It was one of my letters. Back the thin envelope I addressed to Saint Jude Orphanage. Across the front, in brutal red ink, was stamped, "Return to sender, unknown address." I stood in the middle of the cell block, staring at those 3 words, unknown address. Did Saint Jude no longer exist? Or had they moved, dissolved, the children scattered to the wind? Or worse, was the new director simply refusing my mail, erasing me from their history? The outside world wasn't just silent. It was actively rejecting me. The letter for Anna. If Saint Jude didn't exist, she would never receive it either. My voice hadn't echoed. It had hit a wall and died. It was my mini turning point, the coldest realization yet. Rhino was wrong. I wasn't her property. Spoon was wrong. I wasn't her problem. I was nothing. I was a ghost haunting an address that no longer existed. I carried that returned letter in my overalls pocket for 3 days. It was a rough square of paper that felt like it weighed 100 pounds, a constant reminder that the world for which I had sacrificed my life had erased me. I drifted through the routine in a fog, clang at 5 a.m., the cardboard taste of the coffee, the women's screams in the courtyard. Everything seemed distant, the muffled sound of an underwater world. My why was dead. In the laundry room, the heat and steam used to be physical torture. Now I barely felt them. I was at the press, my hands moving by muscle memory, but my mind was elsewhere, trapped on those 3 words. Unknown address. Where was Anna? Where were they all? My failure was so complete that there was no more room for fear. Spoon noticed. She had a radar for hopelessness. It was what she hunted. I was slow. The pile of wet sheets beside me was growing, but I couldn't move any faster. My soul was too heavy. Spoon stepped down from her platform, her steps deliberate. She didn't scream. She stopped beside me, and the hum of my press seemed to stop. She leaned in, her voice low enough that only Grace and I could hear. "What's wrong, 77401? A life of crime isn't what you expected?" I kept working, my eyes on the machine. "I heard you received a love letter." The venom in her voice was palpable. "Oh, wait. It was. Returned, didn't you? Nobody wants you. Not even the children you stole." She was using the prison story, the lie the court created. She wanted me to break. She wanted the tears Rhino forbade me to shed. I stopped moving. My hand trembled. I felt the heat rising up my neck, the sting of humiliation. I turned to her, and the words simply came out, not with anger, but with infinite weariness. "Leave me alone." It was a whisper. It was a mistake. Spoon's eyes widened with sadistic pleasure. "What did you say?" She stepped forward, invading my space. "The cook gave me an order?" She raised her hand, not to hit me, but to point a finger at my face. "You are nothing. You are—" Clang! A deafening sound of metal hitting concrete echoed through the laundry room. One of the heavier metal carts, full of wet uniforms, had tipped over, spilling a mountain of dirty laundry onto the floor. It was Grace. She looked at the fallen cart with a feigned expression of surprise. "Oh, heavens! My goodness! What a klutz!" It was such an obvious diversion, yet so effective. The entire laundry room came to a standstill. Spoon's attention instantly shifted from me to the chaos. "You old fool!" she yelled at Grace. "Look at this mess. Clean it up, by yourself." Spoon went to supervise the cleanup, her anger now focused on a new target. Grace picked up a mop, her movements slow and calm. She didn't look at me. She absorbed the fury for me. That night, in the cafeteria, I picked up my tray of gray pasta and bread. I sat at my usual civilian's table. The noise was the usual, a cacophony of shouts and metal. A minute later, a second tray was placed in front of me. It was Grace. She sat down. It was the first time someone had voluntarily sat with me. Silence stretched between us, a bubble of calm amidst the chaos. She didn't talk about the laundry. She didn't talk about Spoon. She ate her food slowly. Then she looked at my tray. I hadn't touched my bread. She pushed that across the table. "Eat," she said. Her voice was soft but firm. "I know what it's like to receive a returned letter." I looked up at her, surprised. "My son stopped writing 7 years ago," she continued, her eyes on her empty tray. "At first I thought he had died. But it's worse. He just forgot me." I looked at this woman, with her gray hair and eyes that had seen everything. She wasn't offering me pity. She was offering me a mirror. "So, how do you go on?" I whispered. "The why." I paused. "The why dies?" Grace shook her head slowly. "No. The why changes." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a strength that was deeper than Rhino's intimidation or Spoon's cruelty. It was resilience. Your why out there was those children. You did what you did for them, right? It's over. Your why, inside here, it can't be them. She leaned in slightly. Your why in here has to be the next breath, the bread you eat. You have to survive for yourself, Martha. My name. She used my name. The sound of it was so shocking, so human, that the tears Spoon couldn't wring out came. I lowered my head, and a single tear fell onto my tray. "Eat the bread," she said again, gently. I took the bread from her. Sharing bread. It was an act of communion. It was the birth of a family. Grace was my new anchor. The laundry room, after that day in the cafeteria, had become a silent battleground. The air was heavier, the steam thicker. Spoon couldn't touch me directly. Rhino's warning in the courtyard, however much it was about property, still echoed. So she targeted Grace. Spoon's cruelty was an art. She transferred Grace from the presses, where she could work at a steady pace, to the hot carts. It was the worst job. Grace had to stick her arms into the giant metal carts right after they came out of the industrial dryers to pull the scalding sheets. The metal of the carts retained a heat that burned through thin gloves. It was a job for women half Grace's age. I watched her from my post at the press, my heart a cold stone. Grace's face was perpetually red. Her gray hair stuck to her forehead with sweat. She was getting thinner. She never complained. She just worked, her lips moving silently. Praying. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. The air in the laundry room was unbearable, a haze of bleach and heat of nearly 100 degrees. One of the main dryers broke down, and the pressure on all of us doubled. Spoon was on her platform shouting orders. "Faster, you cows! Faster!" Grace was unloading a cart. She pulled a sheet, and the hot metal of the cart touched her bare forearm. She hissed in pain, letting the sheet fall and recoiling. Her eyes squeezed shut. Spoon saw. She swooped down from the platform like a hawk. "Tired, Grandma?" she sneered, stopping in front of Grace. "Burned your little paw? Maybe you need a little encouragement." Grace, breathing heavily, shook her head. "I'm fine, Chief Spoon. Just a second." "I don't pay you for seconds," Spoon growled. And then she did. She grabbed one of the freshly pressed uniforms, still steaming from the steam press, and pressed it against Grace's arm right where she was burned. Grace screamed, a sharp scream of pure agony that cut through the noise of the machines, and something inside me broke. It wasn't a decision. It was an instinct, the instinct of Chef Martha pulling a hot pan off the stove, the instinct of Saint Jude's mother snatching a child from danger. In a second, I was away from my press. In a second, my hand was on Spoon's chest. I pushed her. I didn't punch her. I didn't attack her. I pushed, leave her alone. My voice sounded strange, loud and fierce. Spoon stumbled back, her eyes widening in shock, not from the shove, but from the audacity. Then her lips curved into the most satisfied smile I'd ever seen. She had won. The entire laundry room fell silent. The only sounds were the hiss of steam and Grace's low sobs. Spoon said nothing. She simply raised her hand and pressed the red alarm button on the wall. "Assault," she said calmly. "Assault on a supervisor." In less than 30 seconds, the guards were there, heavy boots on the concrete. 77401! Hands on the wall! Now! They ripped me off, threw me against the wall with enough force to take my breath away. I felt the cold metal handcuffs on my wrists tighten tightly. As they dragged me out of the laundry room, my feet barely touching the ground, I looked back. Spoon was standing there, triumphant. And Grace. Grace was on her knees, clutching her burned arm, her face a mask of horror and guilt. Our eyes met. I shook my head. No, it wasn't her fault. It was my choice. The laundry room door slammed shut, and the hot, noisy world vanished. I was taken to segregation. The hole. They didn't take me to an interrogation room. They led me down a corridor I'd never seen before, one that smelled of darkness and urine. The seg cell was different. It was smaller. The bed was a concrete slab sticking out of the wall. The toilet was just a hole in the floor. There was no window, and the door was solid steel, no bars, no view. The guard pushed me inside. He took off the handcuffs. And then the door slammed shut. Bang this time. The sound wasn't just final. It was eternal. The darkness was total. I was floating. But then a light above the door came on, a single bulb, protected by metal, that never went out. It was a cold, gray light. Worse than the darkness of my first night, because this light didn't allow sleep. It didn't allow forgetting. It was an interrogation light, 24 hours a day. I sat on the concrete slab. The silence was absolute. No leaks, no crying, no guards passing by. The hole was soundproof. I was alone. Hours, maybe a day, passed. The cold light began to mess with my head. That's when the mini turning point happened. I had been warned not to cry, not to speak, not to look. I broke all the rules, and I wasn't scared. I was angry. But the strangest thing? I felt, clean by pushing Spoon, I wasn't just saving Grace. I was saving myself, the woman the judge called a monster. The hole was my punishment. But the act was my redemption. I don't know how long I stayed in the hole. Time doesn't exist there. It's just a cycle of cold light, exhausted sleep, and the sliding of a metal tray through a crack in the door. 3 meals, maybe? 3 days? 7 days? I lost count. My body was stiff from sleeping on the concrete, and my eyes ached from the incessant light. I spent the time tracing Anna, Timmy, and Sarah's names on my leg with my finger, just to feel something. I didn't pray for freedom. I prayed for sanity. Then, the sound. The deafening sound of the lock being unlocked. The steel door opened with a groan, and the darkness of the hallway outside felt like a relief. "Stand up, 77401. Hands behind your back." The guard handcuffed me and pulled me out. The first thing that hit me was the air. It wasn't fresh, but it was in motion. The air in the hole was dead. The air in the corridor was alive with smells, bleach, dust, the distant scent of boiled potatoes. My knees buckled. I hadn't walked in days. "Walk!" the guard barked, pulling me along. The walk back to the cell block was a sensory journey. Every sound was an explosion. The jingle of her keys was like church bells. The hum of the corridor lights was a roar. My eyes, accustomed to that dead gray light, watered and ached under the normal fluorescent glare. We went to the mess hall. It was lunchtime. The guard pushed me into the line, removed my handcuffs, and left me there. "Don't make me come back here," she said, and walked away. I grabbed an orange tray. My hands trembled. I was weak, disoriented. But the worst part was the sound. The roar of 100 conversations. The wall of noise hit me like a physical wave. And then, the noise changed. It didn't stop. It would be a lie to say the mess hall fell silent. But the tone changed. The roar diminished to a hum, a collective murmur. I felt it before I saw it. 100 pairs of eyes. On me. I was no longer invisible. In my first week, I was a ghost, a frightened civilian whom everyone ignored. Now, I was somebody. I was the woman who pushed Spoon. I kept my eyes on my tray, the smell of the mushy food making me nauseous. I walked toward my usual table in the corner. The few civilians who usually sat there looked at me in panic, picked up their trays, and moved to another table. They were afraid of me, or afraid of what my presence would bring. I sat alone at an empty table, the noise of the cafeteria slowly returning to normal, but now punctuated by whispers and pointed laughter. I looked up. Spoon's table was across the room. She was watching me. She didn't seem angry. She was smiling. A slow, patient smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile that said, "The whole was the appetizer. The main course is yet to come." Then I saw her. Grace. She was sitting with a different group near the kitchen. Our eyes met. I don't know what I expected. Relief? A nod? Instead, Grace looked away. She lowered her head to the tray, her body hunched over as if she were cold. She was terrified, and that was my mini turning point, the deepest stab. I had gone to the hole for her, and now she couldn't even look at me. My act of redemption hadn't freed her. It had chained her with fear. I had made her a target along with myself. I was toxic. I was a danger. I looked around the room. Spoon wanted to destroy me. The civilians were afraid of me. The woman I saved rejected me. I was completely and utterly alone. And then I saw Rhino. She was at her usual table. She was watching me too, with her usual stony face. Our eyes met through the chaos. She assessed me for a long moment. Then she did something I'd never seen her do before. She gave me a slight nod. A single, slow nod. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't protection. It was recognition. I was marked. I bore Spoon's mark of hatred and Rhino's mark of respect. I was no longer property. I was a player, a reluctant and terrified player, but a player nonetheless. I didn't belong to Grace, and I didn't belong to Rhino. I belonged to myself. The whole took my time, but it gave me an identity. I finished my meal alone, the silence around me a wall as real as the concrete of the hole. I survived solitary confinement. Now I had to survive the population. They didn't send me back to the laundry. That would have been too clean, too straightforward. Spoon didn't want me to be a martyr. She wanted me to be an example. I was demoted to block cleaning. It was the lowest, dirtiest job. Scrubbing the communal pod floor, wiping down the mess hall tables after everyone ate, and worst of all, the showers. The job made me visible to everyone, but it also forced me into the most isolated and filthy corners of the prison. It was a constant reminder of my new status. Marked, but at the bottom of the hierarchy. The tension was as thick as the steam in the laundry. Rhino's nod gave me a fragile shield. No one openly attacked me in the yard, but Spoon's smile gave me a target on my back. The women in the cell block gave me ample space. I was a walking leper. The worst part was Grace. She changed her routine to avoid me. If I was in the cafeteria, she'd eat quickly and leave. If she saw me in the hallway, she'd turn away. The sting of that averted gaze was sharper than any blade. Had the whole been for nothing? I'd broken my invisibility for a friendship that was now dead. I spent my days scrubbing the concrete, my ears ringing with tension, waiting for the blow. It came 3 days after my return. It was my turn to clean the showers. The shower block was a nightmare of cracked tiles and black mold. A long concrete corridor with maybe 20 open showers on each side. No doors, no curtains. Privacy was a joke. The steam was constant, the smell of cheap soap and a sour plumbing odor permanently in the air. The acoustics made each drip sound like a gunshot. I was scrubbing the drain at the end of the hallway, alone. Most of the women were in the yard for recreation time. I had my head down, working fast, hating the smell, hating the damp cold. Then the sound of steam changed. It grew quieter. 2 women had come in and stopped at the only exit, blocking my escape. I didn't recognize them from the laundry. They were taller, with the kind of blank faces prison creates. They weren't from Spoon's team. They were rented. "Look what we have here," one of them said. Her voice was low, almost lazy. The little heroine. I stood slowly, the mop handle slippery in my hand. My heart didn't race. It seemed to stop. "I don't want trouble." "A little late for that, 77401, the other said. They moved forward, and the steam swirled around them like ghosts. They weren't in a hurry. The first one slapped me. A sharp, open-handed slap that echoed off the concrete. My head snapped back, the taste of copper filling my mouth. "That's for Spoon." Before I could recover, the other one punched me in the stomach. The air left my throat in a painful whoosh. I fell to my knees, gasping. "And that's for the mess you made." They weren't trying to kill me. They were teaching me. "You think Rhino's nod means anything here?" The first one sneered, kicking the bucket and pouring the dirty, icy water over me. "Rhino doesn't control the steam." They grabbed my arms and dragged me to one of the showers, turning on the cold water. The icy shock made me gasp. They held me against the tiled wall, the cold piercing my bones. "Spoon wanted to break your fingers," the second one whispered in my ear, her voice full of sickly pleasure. "Those pretty cook's fingers of yours." She grabbed my hand, the hand Grace had bandaged, and began to bend it backward. The pain was explosive, shooting up my arm. I screamed, and then a voice cut through the steam. "Enough!" The voice wasn't Spoon's. It wasn't Grace's. It was Rhino's. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a towel, as if she'd just stepped out of the shower herself. Steam clung to her massive figure. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. The 2 women froze, their hands still on me. "I said enough," Rhino repeated, her voice a low growl. "The message has been delivered. Now get out of my shower stall." The first woman hesitated. "Spoon said—" "I don't give a damn what Spoon said," Rhino cut her off. "You're in my territory. Get out." There was a tense moment. The only sound was the cold water hitting the floor. Then, the 2 women let go of me. I fell to the shower floor, shaking uncontrollably. They walked past Rhino, who didn't move. I lay there on the cold, wet floor, the icy water still falling on me, my body aching, my hand throbbing. I was humiliated, broken. Rhino turned off the water. She stood there staring at me. I was sobbing, the kind of dry, painful sob that comes from pure terror. Rhino sighed, a sound of deep irritation. "I told you not to cry." She unwrapped the dry towel from her shoulders and threw it across my face. "Get up, 77401. I lifted my face, the rough towel soaked with my tears and the shower water. "Why?" I whispered. "Why did you help me?" Rhino looked at me with a disdain that was almost as cold as the water. "I didn't help you," she snarled. "I was showering in peace. They interrupted me. Nobody interrupts my shower." She turned to leave, then stopped. "And one more thing, Cook. You bleed in my block. You attract the guards. You attract the guards, you cause me trouble. Now you're a problem. Clean yourself up. You reek of fear." I cleaned the shower, my body trembling from both the cold and the adrenaline. Every muscle ached. The slap had left my face swollen, and my stomach was a throbbing mass of pain. But the worst part was my hand. The women of Spoon hadn't broken it, but they'd twisted it hard enough that my fingers could barely move. They left me alive, but they left me crippled. I went back to the cell, clutching Rhino's dry towel. She was there, lying on her bunk, reading a worn-out romance novel. She didn't even look up when I came in. "You're bleeding on my floor," she murmured. I looked down. A small trickle of blood from my lip had fallen onto the concrete. I quickly wiped it away with the back of my bruised hand. "Sorry. I don't want apologies," she said, turning the page. "I want you gone. Go to the infirmary. Get a bandage. You look like trash and you're attracting attention." I went. The infirmary was another sterile cubicle, where a bored nurse wiped my lip, gave me an ice pack for my face, and bandaged my hand without asking a single question. She didn't even ask how it happened. She didn't care. Injuries were part of the routine, like the gray paste. When I returned, Rhino was sitting on the bed. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. "Good. Now you owe me." The air in the cell went still. I knew this was coming. The wave in the yard, the intervention in the shower. Those weren't gifts. What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Rhino finally sat up, her feet tapping on the floor. She was a mountain of a woman, and in the tiny cell, she seemed to take up all the oxygen. "Spoon won't stop," she said, as if arguing over time. "She's been humiliated. You made it personal. Now you're a bone she can't let go of." "I didn't ask for your help," I said stupidly. Rhino laughed, a low, dangerous sound. "No, you didn't ask, but I gave it to you. You're in my pack. You're a problem in the carpet. What happens to you reflects on me. Spoon knows that. She wasn't just hitting you, she was testing me. And I don't like being tested." She stood up and came over to me, stopping so close I could smell cheap soap and something metallic on her breath. "So now you're going to be useful. You're not a civilian anymore. You're mine. And you're going to pay your debt." My cleaning job remained, but now I had new tasks. "You see everything cleaning," Rhino said the next night. "You see who talks to whom. You see what the guards don't see. You're going to be my eyes." I froze. Spy. She wanted me to be an informant inside the prison. "I can't," I began. "You can," she cut me off. "Or you can try your luck with Spoon again. This time, I'll watch." And so began my descent. What the court couldn't do, what Spoon couldn't do, Rhino could. She was forcing me to become the kind of person I despised. My cleaning job became moral torture. I scrubbed the pod floor and listened. I listened to the women on Spoon's team plotting to smuggle cigarettes from the laundry. I listened to the younger women in the yard talking about a guard who was bringing in drugs. I saw who was in debt and who was collecting. I saw the secret world of the prison, the economy of favors, fear, and illicit goods. And every night, I had to report. I sat on my top bunk in the darkness and whispered what I'd seen to Rhino's shadow below. "The blonde from Block C, she's keeping something for Spoon, in the mattress lining. The new guard, the young one, she's afraid of the laundry girls." I hated myself. Every word I whispered felt like a betrayal, not just to them, but to myself. I'd gone to the hole for an act of moral defiance, and now I was becoming a rat to survive. It was the mini-twist, the greatest irony of my sentence. I was imprisoned for a crime I didn't commit, an act of sacrifice they called theft. Now, to survive my false sentence, I was committing real moral crimes every day. I wasn't trying to save children anymore. I was just trying to save myself from tomorrow's beating. And the worst part? I was good at it. Chef Martha, the silent observer who knew exactly who needed a kind word in Saint Jude. That same skill made me the perfect spy. Rhino was pleased. "You're smart, cook," she murmured one night. "You see things. You can survive." But I wasn't surviving. I was rotting. 2 years, 24 months being Rhino's eyes, 830 days being a shadow scrubbing the floor. I had become a professional at survival. I knew which guard accepted cigarettes as bribes, which family was on the rise, and which was about to fall. I was an expert on the prison's rotten ecosystem. Spoon still hated me, but she left me alone. Attacking me now meant challenging Rhino, and Rhino was the silent, unchallenged power of the block. I had status, I had security, and I had lost every last ounce of self-respect I had left. The hole had cleansed me, but the debt to Rhino had stained me forever. I no longer wrote letters. The outside world was a dead story, and St. Jude was a graveyard in my mind. I was 77401, and I was a spy. It happened on a Thursday. I was finishing cleaning the cafeteria, the smell of vinegar and spoiled food clinging to my skin. A new guard, a young man who still seemed intimidated by the prisoners, stopped at the entrance. 77401, visit. I stopped mopping. The mop hit the floor. Visit? The word sounded strange, like a foreign language. No one visited me. Ever. The returned letter was my final answer. My first thought was, it's a trap, an interrogation. Maybe an outside police officer about the robbery. My stomach churned. Visiting whom? I asked, my voice hoarse. The guard checked his clipboard. It says here, lawyer. Ana Rodriguez. The name meant nothing to me. Ana, a common name. Lawyer. That meant trouble. I handed the mop to another prisoner who looked at me with a new mixture of fear and curiosity. Follow me. The walk to the visiting room was down a corridor I rarely used. It was cleaner, painted a less depressing beige, and smelled of floor wax, not despair. Each step made my heart pound against my ribs. Was I being transferred? Released? No, never. Arrested for another crime? My hands, bandaged at the knuckles where laundry arthritis was beginning to set in, were sweating. The guard led me to a room I'd only seen in movies. A long row of booths, separated by thick greenish glass that stretched from floor to ceiling. The hum of the fluorescent lights was quieter here, but the air was thick with emotion. On one side, women in orange uniforms cried, laughed, shouted into black telephones. On the other side, civilians, weeping mothers, husbands looking lost, confused children. It was the room of pain and hope, and I belonged to neither. Booth 7, the guard said. I slid onto the cold metal stool bolted to the floor. On the other side of the glass, a young woman sat. She wore a dark, professional suit. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. She looked to be in her early 20s, too young to be a lawyer, too young to be in this place. She looked up as I sat down. Her eyes, there was something about them. They were dark and quiet. Eyes I knew. But it couldn't be. My name is Martha, I said into the black phone, my voice trembling. The young woman picked up the phone from the other end. Her hand was steady. I know, she said. Her voice was clear, strong. Martha, it's been a long time. She looked at me, and the professional suit vanished. I wasn't seeing a lawyer. I was seeing the frightened girl in the Saint Jude hallway, the girl holding the wooden bird I carved. Anna, I gasped. It was the mini turning point, the bomb that destroyed the world I'd built in prison. It was her, the girl I'd protected, the girl I thought I'd lost. But St. Jude, the letter, they closed it, she said, her voice hard, but her eyes soft. They scattered us. I went to 5 different foster homes, but I never forgot. I kept the bird. She leaned closer to the glass. Martha, I've spent the last 10 years of my life focused on a single goal. I worked 3 jobs. I slept in the law school library. And last week, she paused, and for the first time, her voice wavered. Last week, I passed the bar exam. I'm officially a lawyer. I couldn't breathe. The world was spinning. Anna? Why? Why? She repeated, a small, bitter laugh escaping her. Because I was there, Martha. I was in the hallway. I saw you hide the money in the pantry vent. I heard you say, it's for the children. It's their only chance. I saw you get arrested for it. She straightened up, and the lawyer was back. You were convicted of theft, but I am a witness to the sacrifice. I will reopen the case. I floated back from the visiting room. The guard escorting me had to nudge me on the shoulder. Come on, 77401. I don't have all day. I didn't even hear him. The beige hallway, which had previously smelled of wax and pain, now seemed just a hallway. The sound of my plastic boots on the floor, the hum of the lights, the distant cry of a prisoner in the yard. Everything seemed to be behind glass, the same glass that separated me from Anna. Anna. She was alive. She was a lawyer. She it saw. The truth, which I had buried under 2 years of gray paste and fearful obedience, was alive. The seed I thought had died in the poisoned soil of Saint Jude had somehow sprouted in the concrete. I wasn't crazy. My sacrifice wasn't in vain. When the guard unlocked me and shoved me into the communal pod, the wall of noise and sour smell hit me, trying to bring me back to reality. But I wasn't there. I was in a hopeful trance. Women passed by me, shoulders bumping, assessing glances, but I didn't see them. I went straight to our cell. Rhino was there, which was unusual for this time of day. She wasn't reading. She was sitting on the bottom bunk, waiting. She had heard me come. The moment the cell door closed behind me was the moment the glass shattered. The air was thin. Rhino's eyes weren't like spoons, full of warm malice. They were reptile eyes, cold, calculating, missing absolutely nothing. She sensed the change in me the instant I walked in. "You're floating, Cook," she said, her voice low. Who was in the suit? Fear returned, icy and instantaneous. Hope was a bright light, and in this darkness, a bright light attracts all predators. I had a secret. For the first time, I had something Rhino couldn't have, something I had to protect. Nobody, I lied. The word came out weak. A lawyer, public defender. They're reviewing old cases. It was nothing. I turned, pretending to straighten my bunk, my hands trembling so much I could barely fold the rough blanket. Rhino didn't move, but I could feel her eyes burning into my back. "Nothing," she repeated, savoring the lie. "You leave here looking like a scared ghost every morning, and come back from a nothing meeting looking like you've seen Jesus. Don't lie to me, Martha." She used my name. The alarm went off in my head. She only used my name when she was giving me a final warning. I turned to her, forcing my face to be blank. "That's the truth. They said the original judge is under review. It could mean a reduced sentence, but you know how they are. It's all talk." Rhino studied me for a long, long moment. She was deciding whether I was a threat or an idiot. She chose the latter. "Hope," she sneered, the sound full of contempt. She lay back. "Hope is a bitch. She makes you lift your head, and the people who lift their heads here, they're the ones who lose them." The warning had been given. I climbed onto my bunk, my body trembling. I had survived the first lie. That night, for the first time in 2 years, the darkness was not a comfort. The lights going out brought terror. The silence of the cell was filled by my own pulse, which seemed to scream, "Anna is coming, Anna is coming." Every sound from outside, a guard passing by, a shout, the clang from a distant gate, it made me jump. What if they hurt Anna? What if Rhino found out? My debt to her was espionage, but lying to her, that was betrayal. The next day, everything was different. The cleaning work was the same, but I wasn't. The smell of bleach wasn't just a smell, it was the smell of time I was wasting. The gray paste at breakfast wasn't just bad food, it was poison. Anna gave me hope, but Rhino was right. Hope was torture. It made the present unbearable. I was scrubbing the cafeteria floor when I saw Grace. She was watching me from across the room with an expression of pure pity. She saw me come back from my visit yesterday. She saw the glint. She didn't approach. She knew what that glint meant. She knew it was the glint you see on a deer moments before the wolf attacks. And the wolf was watching. At that very moment, Spoon came into the cafeteria to get coffee. Her eyes met mine. I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I was thinking of Anna. My face was neutral, but my eyes must have been shining. Spoon's smile vanished. She saw. She didn't know what it was, but she saw that the prey she had broken was no longer broken. She saw the light, And she knew, just as I do, that the only thing you can do with the light in prison is to extinguish it. The prison, after Anna's visit, became a noisy clock. Every clang from the countdown, each scream in the courtyard was a second less. I was in a new kind of confinement, waiting. I had become the world's best prey. I scrubbed the floor with my head down. I didn't speak to anyone. I whispered my reports to Rhino with monotonous precision, making myself the most efficient spy she'd ever had, hoping my usefulness would keep me alive. I was a ghost. But hope has a scent, and predators smell it. Spoon smelled it. She watched me in the cafeteria line, her eyes filled with a venomous patience. She knew I had something. She was waiting for the moment to take it, and Anna's moment was approaching. I would receive another visit soon, this time to sign the appeal papers. I just needed a few more days. The attack came from where I least expected it. It wasn't in the shower. It was with fire. I was in the main hallway, scrubbing the floor outside the laundry room when the alarm sounded. It wasn't the count alarm. It was the fire alarm. A high-pitched electronic scream that cut through the air, followed by real screams. Smoke, thick and black, billowing from the laundry room entrance. Chaos was instant. Guards rushed out, yelling, "Lockdown! Lockdown! Back to your cells!" But through the smoke, Spoon emerged, coughing dramatically, her face covered in soot that looked deliberately smeared. She saw me. She pointed. "It was her! 77401! She did it!" The guards stopped. They looked at me. I was there, with a bucket of dirty water, 10 feet from the fire, perfectly positioned to be the culprit. "I saw her!" Spoon yelled, her voice full of feigned hysteria. She threw cleaning products in the hot dryer. She said she was going to make us all pay. "Hands on the wall, 77401. 2 guards grabbed me, throwing me against the concrete. "I didn't do it. I was cleaning the hallway," I yelled, but my voice was lost in the chaos of the alarm. "Shut up!" One of them pulled my arms back so hard that my shoulder snapped. This was it. This was Spoon's move. Physical assault was one thing. The whole was temporary. But sabotage? Arson? That was a federal crime. That would kill Anna's appeal. That would add another 20 years to my sentence. I would be buried here. I would be transferred to the Supermax. I was lost. Spoon was watching me being handcuffed, her face a mask of victorious triumph behind the soot. She had won. "She's lying." The voice was low, calm, and full of boredom, and it cut through the fire alarm like a razor. Rhino. She stood at the end of the hallway, blocking the entrance to Block C, her arms crossed. She wasn't running. She wasn't panicking. She was watching the show. The guard holding me stopped. "What did you say, Rhino?" "I said Spoon is lying," Rhino repeated, stepping forward. The hallway became eerily silent, except for the alarm. It was Rhino against Spoon, the silent power against the noisy power. "The cook," Rhino said, "was with me, in my block, cleaning, my shower, all the time." The lie was so blatant, so calm. It was a concrete alibi. Spoon stammered. She's covering for her. They're in this together." The head guard looked from Spoon to Rhino. Spoon's word, a prisoner supervisor, was strong. But Rhino's word was, law challenging Rhino's alibi would mean starting a factional war that would plunge the prison into chaos for months. The guard wasn't interested in war. He was interested in paperwork. The guard let out a frustrated sigh. He glanced at the fire, which was already being contained, and clearly wasn't a big deal. A sheet cart. "I don't have time for this shit," he growled. He unlocked my handcuffs, shoving me away. "Get out of my sight, 77401. Back to your cell." He turned to Spoon. "And you, control your laundry." Spoon gaped, her face red with anger beneath the soot. She was defeated. Rhino didn't say anything more. She just turned and walked back to Block C. I followed her, running, my legs like rubber. When the steel door of the block slammed shut, I leaned against it, panting, my heart about to explode. Rhino went to our cell and sat on the bunk. Silence returned. Why? I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling. You lied for me. You hate liars. Rhino didn't look at me. She picked up her worn romance novel. Spoon broke the rules. She used fire. Fire attracts the state. The state turns mattresses upside down, disrupts business. It's bad for everyone. She opened the book. But you're worse. You and your lawyer. I froze. The blood drained from my face. What do you know? I know everything, Cook. I know it's not a reduced sentence. I know the girl from the orphanage is back. That was the mini twist. She knew, all along. You think I'm stupid? I can read people. You smell who's leaving. She turned to me, and her eyes were dead, devoid of any emotion. You're no longer useful to me. You're a spy who dreams of trees. You're a liability. You're no longer my property. I couldn't speak. I didn't lie for you, she said, her final voice. I lied to settle an account. You owed me. Now, with Spoon, it's a very big problem. I wiped my slate clean. Consider your debt paid. She lay down, opening the book. Now, just try not to get killed before your girl takes you away from here. And never speak to me again about what you hear in the hallways. The days following Rhino's liberation were the longest of my life. I was no longer under his protection, which meant I was free prey. But Spoon's fire and Rhino's intervention created a neutral zone around me. No one spoke to me. No one touched me. I was a ticking time bomb. Spoon watched me with a hatred that had soured into patience. She knew that prison life would eventually get to me. But I wasn't living prison life anymore. I was living in limbo, waiting for the call. It came a week after the fire. It wasn't a visitation call. It was 77401, transport. My heart stopped. Transport. It meant transfer to another prison. Maybe Supermax because of the fire. Rhino's lie didn't save me. Or it meant court. I didn't have time to grab anything, not that I had anything. I was stripped of my orange uniform for the last time. They gave me the civilian clothes I'd been imprisoned in over 2 years ago. They smelled of mothballs and failure. The pants were baggy. I'd lost weight. The air outside the main gate was a shock. The sun. The true sun. Not the orange glow filtered through the courtyard. It hurt. I was put into a van, this time with windows. The world passed me by. Cars, trees, people walking on sidewalks. It felt like a movie in high speed, and it made me nauseous. The woman looking out the window wasn't Chef Martha. She was a pale, thin animal, blinking at a light she didn't understand. The courthouse was the same dark wood building, the same smell of polish and old paper. But this time, when I entered the room, the air was different. It was crowded. Reporters. People. I saw Anna. She was sitting at the defense table, not as a visitor, but as the dona from the place. She wore a light gray suit. She looked calm, lethal. Our eyes met as the guard sat me down next to her. I was handcuffed. Breathe, Martha, she whispered, not looking at me, focused on her papers. They're going to paint you as a monster. They're going to use the prison against you. Don't react. Let them. Their job is to talk about 77401. My job is to talk about Martha. And they tried. The prosecutor, a young man who looked at me like I was a piece of trash, was relentless. This woman is not a victim, he thundered to the jury. She's a hardened criminal. Prison records show assault on a work supervisor. She was placed in segregation for violence. She was charged with arson. I cringed. Spoon somehow was here, her venom reaching the courtroom. Anna didn't protest. She let the prosecutor build my coffin. When he finished, there was silence in the room. I was the monster he described. The judge, a new woman I'd never seen, looked at Anna. Your witness, Ms. Rodriguez. Anna stood up. She walked to the center of the room. She didn't call a witness. Shira, the witness. My name is Anna Rodriguez, and I am one of the children Martha Litton was convicted of stealing from. A murmur swept through the room. The prosecution talks about records. I would like to speak about the truth. And she spoke. For an hour, she didn't speak like a lawyer. She spoke like the girl from the orphanage. She painted a picture, not of a crime, but of a home. She described the director who disappeared, the unpaid bills, the fear. They say she stole. I say she protected us. "Objection," shouted the prosecutor. "That's a speech. The witness was a child. Her memory isn't reliable." "I agree," Anna said calmly. The prosecutor paused, confused. "An 8-year-old's memory can be faulty." She turned to the judge. "That's why I didn't rely solely on my memory." She walked to her desk and picked up a thick envelope. "The day Martha Litton was arrested, I saw her hide a package in the air vent of the old Saint Jude pantry. She said it was for us. She was arrested before she could tell anyone." She turned to the prosecutor. "When my office reopened this case, we issued a search warrant for that building, which has been abandoned for years." The prosecutor was pale. He knew what was coming. "Objection. Here's the police report." Anna cut him off, handing it to the judge. "And here is what they found." She opened a second folder. The money, $150,000, exactly the amount the original director stole from the pension fund and that Martha was accused of taking. She didn't steal it. She stole it. The courtroom exploded. The prosecutor was speechless. Spoon, rhino, the hole, the fire, it all evaporated. It was dust. The truth wasn't in the prison records. It was in a dusty vent. The mini-turn was devastating. Anna wasn't there to argue. She was there to present a receipt. The rest was a blur. The prosecutor dropped the charges. The judge banged the gavel. But this time the sound wasn't a condemnation. It was an apology. "Martha Litton, you're free." Free. The word felt strange. The sound that snapped me out of my trance was a guard unlocking my handcuffs. The click. The same sound that had held me captive now set me free. I looked at my hands, free, red, and marked. And then I looked at Anna. She was putting away her papers, but her hands were trembling. The lawyer had left. The girl was there. And she was crying. Leaving that courtroom wasn't like in the movies. There was no explosion of joy. When Anna took my hand and guided me toward the front doors, toward the sun, it was like emerging from a dark cave only to be hit by a train. The world was very high. The sound of traffic, people talking on their cell phones, the wind in the trees. It was a cacophony that made my teeth ache. My ears, attuned for years to the clang from the steel, the whisper of rhino, and the hiss of steam, they didn't know how to process it. The air. The air smelled of car exhaust, street food, and something sweet I couldn't identify. It was perfume. The absence of the smell of bleach and fear made me dizzy. I stopped on the sidewalk, and the world spun. People passed by me, laughing, hurrying. They didn't know how to walk slowly. In prison, you never hurry. It attracts attention. Here, everyone was running. "Martha, are you all right?" Anna's voice anchored me. I looked at her, this young woman who was, at the same time, my savior and my last connection to the past. I was no longer her protector. She was mine. "It's very brilliant," I murmured. My hands, free from the handcuffs, felt strangely light. I didn't know what to do with them. I stuffed them into the pockets of my baggy pants. Anna led me to her car, a small, clean car that smelled of coffee and paper. She drove me to her apartment, a small place on the 3rd floor with a large window. She made me sit down. "I'm going to make coffee, real coffee." She brought me a ceramic mug, warm to the touch. The smell of the coffee was so rich, so real that I cried. I didn't cry in court. I didn't cry in the hole. But I cried because of the smell of coffee. That night, she gave me her room. A bed. A soft mattress, sheets that smelled of lavender. The first time I lay down, it was like sinking into quicksand. It was too soft. I felt unsafe. And the silence. The silence of the night in a city apartment wasn't the silence of the hole. It was punctuated by distant sirens, the hum of the refrigerator, the creaking of the building. But there were no keys, no screams, no breathing from 3 meters away. I couldn't sleep. I got out of bed, and slept on the bedroom floor, on the rug, with my back against the wall. It was the only way I could feel safe. I needed the concrete against my back. The real test came the next morning. The bathroom. Anna had gone to work, leaving me alone in an eerily quiet place. I stared at the bathroom mirror. In prison, we only had pieces of polished metal, which showed a distorted reflection. This was a real glass mirror. And I saw myself. I saw myself for the first time in almost 3 years. The face staring back at me wasn't Martha's, the cook, and it wasn't 77401's. It was a stranger, a thin woman with dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. My hair was dull, with gray streaks I didn't know I had. My eyes, those were the worst. They were Rhino's eyes, alert, empty, trusting nothing. I raised my hands. They were permanently clenched, my knuckles swollen from the arthritis of the steam press. The burn scars Grace gave me and Spoon gave me were still there, pale against my skin. The court said I was free. The mirror told me I would never get out. The prison was inside me. The cell had come with me. That was the mini turning point. Freedom wasn't a place. It was a battle. And I was losing. I sat on the bathroom floor, the same floor where I slept, and broke down. I cried for Chef Martha, the woman I was, who believed in good and made apple pies. She was dead. I went to her funeral and didn't even know it. When Anna came home that night, she found me in the kitchen, just staring out the window. "They took me from there," I whispered to the glass. "But how do I get myself out?" That Anna didn't say anything. She reached into her bag and pulled something out. A small object, wrapped in a soft cloth. She placed it in my hand. It was the bird. The little wooden bird I had carved for her so many years ago. The paint was worn, and the wood was smooth from handling. "I carried it with me," she said, her voice choked. "In every foster home, in law school. When I wanted to give up, I looked at it. It doesn't have wings, Martha, but it taught me how to fly." I closed my bruised hand around it. The court gave me my freedom. Anna gave me my redemption. I still sleep on the floor sometimes. The silence still scares me. I'll never be the woman I used to be. The mirror doesn't lie. But every morning I pick up that wooden bird. Prison taught me about evil. Grace taught me about sacrifice. Rhino taught me about power. And Anna taught me about faith. Sometimes justice isn't found in a courtroom. Sometimes it's found in a dusty vent or in the hands of a child who refused to forget. Sometimes God doesn't open the cell. He changes who we are inside. I want to know that there are still hearts listening on the other side of the bars. If stories like mine, stories of faith in the midst of fire, touch something in you, sign up. My name is Martha, and this was my confession. On this channel, a like, it's not just a click. It's a silent sign that you believe in redemption. It's your hand on the glass saying, "I see you," and you comment. It's proof that these voices aren't whispering into the void. Which moment in this journey, the whole, Rhino's lie, or the reunion with Anna, impacted you the most? Let me know below. I'll be waiting.